There we go. Thank you. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'll be presenting results from a study that formed part of my PhD thesis, which I completed last year, which was supervised by Fiona Fiddler, Eden Smith, and David Wilkinson at the University of Melbourne. So, the title of my talk says we're talking about computational reproducibility. So I want to start just by covering what computational reproducibility is. So we're talking about this idea it's an idea that's been receiving attention over the past several years as part of the broader replication crisis. I like to use the definition that was decided upon by the US National Academies of Science in 2019, which says computational reproducibility is obtaining consistent results using the same input data, computational steps, methods, and code, and conditions of analysis. This can be contrasted with replicability, which is defined as obtaining consistent results across studies aimed at answering the same scientific question, each of which has obtained its own data. So in this case of computational reproducibility, we're not concerned with replicating results by collecting new data. We're focused on repeating analyses on the original data collected. So from this definition, you can see that any investigation of computational reproducibility is going to depend on the availability of not only the original data, but also the original computer code. Now, the study and what I'm talking about has been published in PLOS ONE. I will include a link to the article at the end of the presentation. So a lot of the results that you'll see here come from this paper, but I've also added some additional insights and discussion points, which have happened since this paper was published. So what's really interesting is the disciplines of ecology and evolutionary biology are a really interesting case study because the sharing of data and code, the raw elements needed for computational reproducibility, has been a frequent topic of discussion in the literature, as shown here in 2010, regarding the need for archiving data in evolutionary biology. Then again in 2011, data archiving in ecology and evolution, best practices, followed up by how well are we doing at public data archiving in ecology and evolution. That's in 2015. But then also here as well in 2020, a study looking at the low availability of code in ecology rather than data. And here we have in 2020 a call for urgent action. So when I started this study, which was in 2017, 2018, relatively little attention had been paid to actually attempting to computationally reproduce results using the shared data and code. So the study that I set upon aimed to conduct a computational reproducibility audit, of a sample of the ecology and evolutionary biology literature. First, by checking for available data and code associated with the paper, and then for those articles that do have both, attempting to reproduce the result from that article. And from this, we could determine a sort of a reproducibility success rate. Those were the initial aims when I embarked on this folly. So I ended up focusing on articles which had conducted a meta-analysis, which had been published between 2015 and 2017 inclusive, in one of 21 ecology and evolutionary biology journals, which tended to publish meta-analyses. So I did a troll of the literature in these journals, and I yielded a total 177 eligible meta-analysis articles. And then I went through them one by one, and I looked for the availability of data and code. Now we'll start with this. So data availability was high. So 75% of the articles of those 177 meta-analyses had available data. What I'm showing you here is, and this is this study also, because we're talking in 2026, and we're sort of going back to the period 2015 to 2017, so 10 years ago approximately. This study is quite an interesting time capsule in terms of what the data sharing practices were at the time. So in the sample I looked at, 2015 to 2017, it was most common for authors to include their data files as supplementary material on the journal publisher's website, which that site was often paywalled. Um, in in contrast, data files placed in a data repository such as Dryad or Figshare or Zenodo were not paywalled. So you can see the top result there is the journal website. So that's the publisher's website I'm talking about as a as a link to supplementary material at the bottom of the article webpage. And having a look at the format of those data files, the data files that were most often shared in Microsoft Excel spreadsheets, and what I mean by that is in the OpenXML XLSX format, or the binary .xls format. That's what I called Excel files, as opposed to a CSV, common separated form, which was the next most common way for data files to be or data file formats to be shared. A notable minority shared numerical data tables within a Microsoft Word document, or indeed within a PDF document. Storing numerical data in these formats made the process of importing that data for reanalysis quite difficult. And you can also just see here as well, there was a small number of, there was one case of RData format or other binary formats as well. So in comparison to data availability, which was 75%, code availability was much lower. Only 16% of articles had code available or had proactively shared their code. Here's a little breakdown of the type of code shared. So this table shows the programming language of the code. So you can see here there was one piece of code written in Fortran, one in Python, 25 in R, one in both R and C++. So and also, I also want to say at this point, across the entire sample, so those 177 articles, regardless of whether they shared their code or not, 80% of the meta-analysis articles over that period, 2015 to 2017, mentioned that they'd used R specifically for their analysis. So when we combine these to say, so of all those papers, how many had both data and code? And that ended up being just 16 articles out of 177, or 15%. So these 26 articles, they became my focus because I had both the code and I had the data, and I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and use those both together to try and reproduce results from the paper. What I ended up doing, because that ended up being an amorphous task, so I ended up deciding on finding the first what I called the first summary effect of the meta-analysis, the first one reported in the results section of the paper. I chose that to be my target rather than try and do everything. Just do one result in the paper. In this table, you can see what I'm talking about when I say when I've picked a result. So I picked a summary effect ended up being a particular effect size estimate. And you can see here there's Pearson's R, Fisher's Z, Hedges D, and Hedges G. And then along with that estimate, the associated sample size and also the associated measure of uncertainty. So typically that was a confidence interval or credible interval of some kind, or it could be a p-value, or as shown in this table as well, a standard error as well. So from each paper, I got a small number of the statistical results, and I said, okay, those are my targets. I'm going to try and recalculate them using the code and using the data that I'd been able to obtain. So all 26 involved R for the R. I'll say a point. There was that one Python and that one Fortran example. Those two examples, even though they were code, they were actually associated with simulation results, which were not actually part of the meta-analysis itself. They were sort of like another study, and they were for a different study reported in the same paper. So, and they didn't actually make use of data in like a data file in that sense. So I ended up putting those two examples aside. So all remaining cases of code and data were R programming scripts. So what I did, so I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to run this, and I'm going to try and reproduce those results. And I set myself the task of trying to work as reproducibly myself, so I could repeat what I was doing and really keep track of what I was trying to do. So I ran each reproduction attempt within a computing environment, which was a session of R and RStudio running within a Docker container, where I could have control over the precise software and package versions to be used. So I built, in particular, I used the wonderful work of the Rocker project, which is a set of Docker images which have various versions of R pre-installed, and the one I used also had RStudio installed as well, which made things really easy and simple to use. I had a container, I could run it, and I had a session of RStudio which I could make use of, which was wonderful. So I on top of that, building on top of those Rocker images, I created containers which installed all the packages required by the original code from the original authors, and plus some additional packages that I used as well to produce a R Markdown report, which showed the results of what I'd done. At this point, I just want to return to this definition of computational reproducibility. So the same input data, computational steps, methods, and code. I ended up taking this very literally. What I ended up doing was I created a custom function, which I called source lines, which I designed to execute specific lines of a source script by line number. The reason I did this was to keep a very clear record of what part of a original code file I'd run and what parts I hadn't. That was just a way of me to keep track of what I'd done and what I was doing. So what I'll do at this point, I'm going to jump out of this slideshow. Let's have a look here. Hold on. Now, if I can find, I'm going to stop sharing just for the moment. What I'm going to do is, I mentioned I created a set of where are they? Here we go. A set of R Markdown reports. So this was a record of the reproducibility attempt, which I made. Hopefully that's visible on screen now. Okay. So this is the excellent. Thank you. So this is the this is the output I did, and this is an encapsulation of my entire attempt to reproduce something. So in this case, I'm reproducing a 2015 meta-analysis by Senior et al. And what they did, and you can see, so the result to be reproduced. This is a quote taken from page 360 653 of the paper, and you can see we've got we have a particular result here with an estimate and a confidence interval um, about the ratio of mean fitness related traits on single food diets to mixed diets. So what I did is I've captured the original results that's in this first little code chunk on screen. I've captured those original original results, and you can see they've been expressed to 3 decimal places. I can also even though it's not captured in this particular quote, there was also a mention of a sample size of 818. And these are the original results. These are my target results, which I'm going to try and reproduce. Now, wonderfully, the data and the code. I've started with an exemplary example of good practice, which was just a joy to work with. So there were 2 files associated with this meta-analysis. There was a file called code.r, and there was also data objects.r data. So here's what I did. You can see that in this code chunk, I have loaded the libraries which were required by the original script, and I have set here a reference to the location of the file code.r within this container. And I'm going to load the data objects R data data object to release all of the saved objects from that into the environment. And you can see here these are in a subfolder called original. So I've copied into a folder called original into this container. The original code file and data file, they're there, and I can do them and I can work with them now. This is the thing about what I said. I created this function called sourceLine. Here's what I mean. I did. So you can see here, I've just, instead of trying copying and pasting the code, I didn't want to do that. I found I was getting too confused about what was the original code from the original authors and something that I'd had to edit or do something to get it to work. So I tried as much as I could to run verbatim run lines 53 to 60 of the original source file of code.r and to run that and to give the output of that. And I'll just show you what I mean. So you can see here, starting on line 53 to line 60, I'll just show you what that looks like in here is the original code.r file, and you can see there's a lot of this is a very nice example because there's lots of wonderful, lovely commenting and things about all of the various variables and so forth. It's wonderful. But have a look here. So this is hopefully it's visible on your screens. Here's lines 53 down to line 60. And there is here this is RMA, the random meta-analysis, the random effects meta-analysis model, which is a function of the meta4 library package, which has been loaded up here. So this is run. So what I've done is I've run from 53 to 60, and I've taken this code, run it verbatim, exactly as the original authors intended. And and then I have seen what the output is. So those are the same code which we just saw, and here is the output. And you can see here we're getting at the very end of running that, we're getting an estimate as well as confidence intervals, as well as there's also a number as well. Degrees of freedom is 817, which is 1 minus 818. So what I've done here is I've taken the output of that object, I've rounded it to 3 decimal places, the same as what was specified in the original paper, and I've also grabbed the end sample size, and I've got a set of reproduced results. Took their data, ran their code, got these numbers. I'm going to do a comparison of them. And I get here, this is a side-by-side of them in the middle of the screen here, this table. You can see here the point estimate minus 0.363. I reproduced that, I got minus 0.363. And you can see for all of these values, formatting means that the end is specified to 3 decimal places, even though that's an integer number, but never mind. And you can see here the percent error. That's the metric I ended up using to compare the original and reproduced results. So percent error here is the difference between the two values divided by the original value. So it's a percentage of the original deviation from the original value expressed as percentage. But in this case, really happy, all 4 of those values which I attempted to find, I was able to reproduce them exactly down to the specificity of the originally reported articles. And then finally, I'm also exporting that to CSV. And finally, I have a set of information about the session information of this thing, and you can see all of the packages that were loaded at the time. A lot of these were indeed loaded in order to produce this markdown report rather than being used for the calculation of the results themselves. I'll very quickly just show. So I did this 26 times. So there are 26 of these reports, and they follow a very similar thing. So finding the particular value, going through the files provided by the original authors, some notes about what I had to do, but then again, it follows the same thing of setting up the original, a reference to the original file, and then going through and running files, running lines of those codes in order to get what I want. And again, you can see here in this case, there are slight change differences between the original and reproduced, resulting in a non-zero percentage error. But you can see these are close, only a couple of percent off, and the original sample size is exact. So it's so these are all variations. This one in this particular case, the code file was provided as a PDF, and I had to do a lot of processing in order to get that PDF, the text from that PDF, into a format that I could actually sort of read and parse as actual our code. So I ended up sort of extracting that text from the PDF, doing a whole bunch of fiddly things to try and get it nice. And then I created a file called binary fitness, which just contained that data. And more of the same. And all right, I'll go back to my slides. So the point I was making there was, let's have a look here. And I'm going to go no from the current slide. And I suspect, and I think I've got to change swap this. Just let me do that. Okay, you should be, I think you're now seeing a sea of white, which isn't very helpful. Just, okay. Yep. So where are we now? Here we go. So this is just showing again an example of those original and reproduced values. So different by a few percent based on things. You can see there are a few here which I've marked with an asterisk in the percent error on that in the far right column. And the reason I've put them is those ones are differences by what I ended up calling a rounding difference, as in the original was 0.044. We got 0.043. The difference of that could be due to a rounding error. So we decided to be generous and call that, well, that's effectively a rounding error. We'll treat that as, a pretty good get, because the difference just might be due to rounding at that fourth decimal place. So after all of that, I've got all these percentage errors from all these, between all these original and reproduced results. And so the next thing is, well, what's the result? What's the success rate? How much success did you have, Steve? You would ask. And here's the thing. The what we call success requires a little bit of definition. You can see there are 8 percentages on here. They're all success rates, and I'll explain what I mean. So first, consider this highlighted column of success rates. This is calculating success as a fraction of all 177 articles in the sample, and the rates are quite low, as you can see. So 5% of the papers were cases where all target result values matched the original to exactly, or to rounding precision. So 5% out of 177 articles. If you relax those criteria to say, well, at least 50% of those target results values that we tried to reproduce are within 10% of the original, then it rises to 11%. Okay. But still, that's very small. But however, consider the second column. So this calculates the success as a fraction of just those 26 articles that I actually checked. So we could make an argument that for either of these being the proper success rate, and you can see that when you use the denominator of that fraction to be 26 instead of 177, suddenly those rates look a lot higher, to the point where you could say 73%, at least 50% of those target values were within 10% of the original. That's pretty good. You're getting a good 3/4 nearly of those values, successful, a successful reproduction of those values, of those papers. So, but also consider the first, we could also look at it like this. So consider the first 2 rows. I mentioned that for each article, I attempted to reproduce the summary effect size, its sample size, and the uncertainty, like the confidence interval. So there were 4 or so distinct numerical values. So in this top one, I've applied a stringency to every single value. So, if there were 4 values, sample size, effect size, upper and lower bounds, all of those have to be exact or to rounding precision, or all of those have to be within 10% of the original value. And you can see there that ranges from 35 to 58. But what if we relax that a little bit and say, well, you've got, those, what if you only need half of them to be exact, or, or within 10%? So not all of them have to be, if one's way off, don't worry about that, as long as the majority of them are. When you relax it that way, in terms of things, then you get a higher success rate amongst those articles. Now, a quick aside about what I just said. So when we're talking about those majority of those reproduced values, so this table here, this shows 19 cases where it is a simple case of 4 values. The point estimate, the sample size, the lower and upper bounds of the confidence interval, and this shows how well I did across those 4 different types of statistic. So you can see here that I'm getting the sample size is often being exactly reproduced. So that means it matches exactly to the level of precision originally reported. To rounding means that it was, if the original's 1.51 and mine was 1.52, we consider that up to within rounding. Within 10% is within 10% of the original value, and at least 10% means that the value is more than 10% or more away from the original value. And then finally, there's failure, which means that I failed to calculate any value at all. The point I want to make here is that in the context of calculating these values, there's a dependence between these four values. So to some extent, getting these four values correct or incorrect will rise and fall collectively, uh, depending on the quality of the data, whether the code is correct or not. So if there's something wrong in some sense with the data that was shared, it could be that I'm going to get none of those values correct because simply the data is just not what the original authors used. So when we talk about using a majority or at least 50% of the values, matching exactly or something, I just want to say that we need to beware of thinking that those value comparisons are statistically independent events, because they're not. They've got a dependence on each other. So just to get back to this, so my success rate could be as low as 5%, or it could be as high as 73%. It depends on what we want to define as success. If we relax our requirements, we're going to get a correspondingly higher success rate. And there's a lot of flexibility about how we might want to do this. But the point to take away from this exercise is just to note that something as seemingly straightforward as setting criteria for a successful computational reproduction requires a set of judgments to be made. So asking, how important are exact matches in my case, or how close is acceptable for my purposes, or which values matter the most or least, which one should I focus on, which one should I not care about. Those are all value judgments that every reproducing scientist is going to have to make when they embark on an exercise such as this. Now, I want to just make another point about something I did. So I mentioned that I built a reproducible computational environment, the Docker container, to conduct my checks, and that's what I use to create those fancy reports and stuff. That's fine. So here we have our friendly Docker whale with R on top. So there's the nice R container. So I use the R container to get my nice reports out. Now, the thing was I was using, because I was doing this years after the original papers were had their data shared. A lot of the packages that were being used were old and superseded versions. So I wanted to get access to those old versions of the packages and use them for calculations in case there was a difference between using the latest version of the package and using the old version of the package. Now, when I did this, I had access to a free publicly available resource to conveniently obtain old versions of R packages. And I use the Microsoft Application Network, or MRAN. And you can see the paperclip there is representing Microsoft. So they maintained a big archive of historical R packages. And it was really convenient because what I was able to do is I was able to say, okay, give me all of the packages as of this date, install those because that corresponds to an older version of R. And I thought, okay, everything's going to be compatible. I can use an old version of R. I can use the appropriate packages, version of the packages for that version of R, to create a sort of, a time capsule of a particular version of R. It was really good, and I got it all working, and I was very proud of myself. But on the 1st of July 2023, something happened. The MRAN time machine retired on July the 1st, 2023. And so my nice little setup I had about getting historical packages and things didn't work anymore. So Microsoft shut down MRAN, and it doesn't exist anymore. So from that date onwards, since 2023, the results based on my output. So this is the thing. So if you were to take my Docker files and things, which you can do because they're online, you technically can't repeat the precise computational steps that I took to generate my attempts, because you'll get a 404 when you try and uh, contact the Airbrand service to install packages from a particular date. So this isn't because my data and code aren't available. You can grab all that and try and do it. It's because a software service that I relied upon is no longer being maintained. Now, there are alternatives to MRAN, such as the Groundhog R archive neighbor, or GRAN, and there's also Posit's package manager resource. And so if I wanted to get my particular Docker container Markdown report solution up and running again, I could update my Docker files, and I could use one of these resources to get those particular historical R packages installed again when I recreate the images and do it. So if I want to my work that reproduces the results of others to itself remain computationally reproducible into the future, I'm going to need to engage in the active maintenance of my particular solution. So if I relied on GRAN and GRAN stopped working, I would have to move to something else or come up with a way, another solution. So suddenly, if I'm going to commit myself to being a computationally reproducible researcher, am I condemning myself to a future of having to maintain this particular my particular solution into the future, even after I go on and do other things and other projects and stuff? There's a conceptual structure, or a set of ideas which I found really useful for thinking about this issue, which I'm going to outline now. And I apologize in advance for sneaking in a small amount of philosophy of science at the end of this presentation here, so bear with me, please. This is a framework which is given a delicious chocolatey analogy of the software millefeuille. This is by Oke and Weber in their 2021 paper, Epistemic Issues in Computational Reproducibility, Software as the Elephant in the Room. Now, in this paper, they argue that a proper consideration of software is missing from the discussion about computational reproducibility. When I introduced it to you, when we looked at those things, I was talking about sharing code, sharing data. Let's grab that shared code, grab that shared data and work with it. But they're saying, if you're really going to sit down and think about this computational reproducibility idea through, you have to really consider software, and just focusing on data and code availability ignores the complexity of software. And if you're just focusing on sharing data and code, you're focusing on what they call the epistemic characteristic of transparency by sharing your data and code. But that's an incomplete way of thinking about things. So the software millefeuille, named after the French pastry, has 6 entangled layers. So there's the model layer, which is got to be familiar with most of us. That's where the models for the scientific task at hand reside. So those are the models, the methods that scientists are actually using to do, what they want to do. Then there's the code, which is sort of the the instantiation of those methods and things like the random effects meta-analysis model is instantiated in the function RMA in the metaphor package. The computing environment layer, the next layer down, concerns the interaction of that code with libraries, compilers, the operating system, and hardware. Then there's the lower layer of the package layer, which refers to any software in the computing environment which is distributed, such as an application, and which might need support and maintenance to use. There are those words. There's also the license layer, which is about the agreement between software packages and users, covering acceptable use and the ability to use it and so forth. And then finally, there's the final layer of community, which includes all users, novices and experts, but it also includes developers, maintainers, salespeople even. So this scheme here shows us that computational reproducibility is much more than data and code files, and there's many more actors going on than just the original authors sharing their data and code, and then someone like me coming along and picking up that data and code and trying to use it. So in the cautionary example of MRAN that I said, we can think of my failure here to have ignored the package layer. And also perhaps the community and license layers, given that what happened is Microsoft retreated from supporting a particular resource within the R community. And just wanted to go back to, so I said, this idea of that transparency, just sharing your data isn't enough. The authors of this paper also refer to some additional characteristics which we should think about too, like consistency, which is the ability to be certain about which tool is actually being used in the computing environment, transparent or not. Transparency may not be enough for replication if you can't ascertain which tool is being used in which computing environment, and therefore you can't ensure that the particular tool actually does what the authors claim it does. And Sustainability, which is another interesting one here, is refers to the guarantee that the software will work the same way over time and can work differently on differently configured computers, and that support and maintenance will be available. And this is also where I failed here as well. I didn't consider that MRAN would go away one day. Perhaps I should have, but I did not. And then finally, there's inclusivity, which refers to the ability for anyone to use or develop the software tool. And what that means is consider that something as simple as a lack of permission to use a particular piece of software could be enough to render a computational result impossible to reproduce in some contexts. Perhaps not all users all of the time, but some users, some or all of the time, a particularly expensive piece of software or extremely restrictive licensing conditions for some reason. So by its nature, computational reproducibility is entangled with software, and software is contained within this larger social context. So the simple idea of picking up someone's data and code, which is what I naively set off to do, suddenly has deep implications about how scientists work with software and about the communities around particular software packages, programming languages, and so forth. And this is much more complicated than I first supposed. And so seeing computational reproducibility as sort of an expression of transparency alone, data and code sharing, is inadequate. I'll leave that there, and just to wrap up, I just want to address a few limitations to the study I was talking about. So first, we didn't decided not to attempt to contact the article authors of those 177 meta-analyses to ask them for their data and code or for assistance in getting things to work. Now, other studies which have done similar things to what I've done have reported mixed success when you request data and code from authors. But it's true that nevertheless, in principle, assistance from the original authors could have lifted the rate of getting data and code, in particular code, because data was quite well shared. It was just code which wasn't. So if I just emailed all of those authors, asked for their code, I might have had more examples to try to work with, and then I could have emailed them again to say, "Oh, it's not working. Can you help me?" That could have. Now, I didn't do that. I focused on the code that had already been shared. But if I could have done that, I might have seen higher success rates. And second, I only attempted to reproduce a single target study or target result from each article. That was about, keeping this a tractable project and stuff. I could have gone through every article and tried to reproduce every single, numerical value that's reported in that paper. That was infeasible, though I couldn't have done it, and not in time anyway. And so what all we did was use one as sort of a proof of concept to say, well, if you use this data and code, you can get at least one of the results out. That hopefully bodes well that if you tried to do it for the additional results in the paper, you'd get success in that too. And then finally, this is just a little aside. When I embarked on this, I didn't systematically record the time spent on each reproduction attempt. Despite some taking much longer to do than others, some of them really were a few minutes of going, oh, this data is so, the data encode is so well formed. All I just need to go load the data, run the code, it works. Others, I was just trying to figure out exactly what had gone on, or what part of the code did I need to run, and it took a lot longer to work out. So in retrospect, it would have been interesting to sort of have some sort of measure of the amount of effort I needed to go to in order to get the reproduction done, or the time I took before I gave up, saying, oh, I can't do it. So in conclusion, I'll just go through these. So the success rates of my little computational reproducibility audit of one kind of study, meta-analyses, over 2015 to 17, either as low as 5 and as high as 73%. The low rate of code sharing was the major limitation to the number of attempts I ended up making. Data was quite good. So improvement to success rates would require researchers to share their code. Now, there is reason to believe that since 2017, things have gotten much better because, as I said, there have been the call to action and things, as well as the establishments of SORTEE itself, and a greater awareness around transparency and reproducibility, such that if we were to look at the 2015 to 2025 to 2027 literature, we would find a much higher rate of code and data sharing. There's reason to be optimistic there. But just as my last point, I've also just sort of given a glimpse at this idea that sharing alone isn't necessarily enough, and there's some amount of maintenance and upkeep that might be required, or passing on that burden to the reproducers in the future. Finally, just some very quick acknowledgements and declarations. So thank you to my co-authors and PhD supervisors who were the co-authors on this paper, David Wilkinson, Edith Smith, and Fiona Fiddler. I received funding from a Melbourne Research Scholarship and from the Australian government for my PhD, and my supervisor, Fiona Fiddler, received ARC funding for this particular thing. And I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we performed this PhD work, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. I will be very happy to take questions, and here is the QR code and the URL for the paper, and you can follow the links there, and also follow on to the repository for the data and code for what I've done. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'll jump in with a question then. Hi, Steve. Long time no see.
Hello.
I'm wondering because what I know some organizations do is that they actually keep local versions of packages for versioning purposes. Do you think that it's something reasonably achievable for, like, say, individual researchers to do, like when they stash the code and then it's just like, okay, here's a separate version, maybe nicely packaged up in the Docker package or something. Do you think that's achievable?
That's a really good question. Because the short answer is yes, because I have seen it done. A particular research group, or a particular project has made a great effort to sort of archive all of that, whether it's on GitHub or wherever. There's a set of all of that, and it really is user friendly, and so forth. Now, that's not universal at all. um, and it raises questions to say, is that a standard we should be expecting of all scientists, of all levels of experience and familiarity with people, because and again, this isn't about being, I don't. It's not about being mean or denigrating anyone's abilities. Some people have, for instance, in art, that they have the ability to run, analysis very competently, perfectly fine, but they don't really have much truck with, version control or anything like that. But they've executed their particular analysis perfectly well. That as part of the broader thing, it would be wonderful if we could elevate the skills and those people, but it's just not always going to be the case. And if you sort of immediately jumped on someone and say, could you please upload all the packages you used, up to a thing, with the version control, and they say, what's a package? That's not necessarily going to be a productive enterprise.
Yes, I very much agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Alfredo, you've got a question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
I got it. Fantastic chat, a fantastic talk. I have read the paper some time ago, and I have it in a few of my presentations. It's really great to see also all the amazing details and how careful you were doing this. So I was wondering, for the time, so you did not collect, and you said that there will be a couple of cases in which you were done in a few minutes, but what was more or less, maybe you mentioned an amide, but what was more or less the maximum amount of time once you had set up all your pipeline, which is probably already took you a while? What was the maximum, or a couple of examples of how long it took you to produce the results?
Now this is a tricky thing, because I want to say there was an iterative process to it. Because there were, because basically, on one way I could say it took me weeks to do some of them, in the sense of I made an initial attempt, I got nowhere, I left it alone. I went and did the other ones, and then I came back to it having got the experience from mucking around with a well-formed example of that particular package or whatever, and came back to that and goes, oh, that's what they were doing, or that's what they meant, and then I could run it. So it's just this thing of, I needed to spend time with it, sort of cogitating in the background, before I could get it done. Now, in the particular context of doing a PhD and so forth, I had that luxury to sort of sit on that for quite a while. But if there was some reason to some sort of time pressure or something of can we reproduce these or not by the end of the week, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have had to have again asked the authors for help or done something more drastic. So it's difficult to say. Like I will say, especially at the start, and this is also the thing, I did spend time refining my pipeline as well. So I sort of had a very minimum viable thing of just getting some output, and then I realized, oh no, I should be adding more detail and creating a better audit trail of what I'm doing. So I went back and redid some. But yeah, but. I do. Let's put it this way, I have memories of sitting down for like hours with some of them, and just reading the code, reading the documentation, online for the package, and all that sort of stuff to actually understand what's going on and that sort of thing. So yeah, there was hours of many man hours of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And were those actually the ones that perhaps were less producible eventually once you finished doing them?
No,
or...
that's the interesting thing. No, because some of them really were, and this is something I didn't go into detail of. One of the big honking issues here is the competence of the reproducing scientist in the first place, which was me. And I'm very willing to say that in many ways I was not competent. And it really was that of getting experience and sitting with it and stuff to actually build up that competence, or to actually go, oh, I now know what I'm doing. And that took just time and perseverance and things. But the answer is no. With some of them, it really was me not understanding basically the syntax of a particular package, or the significance of a particular, how a particular set of priors were working, or even just some subtlety in R where it's sort of like, oh no, that's a list. You're treating a list like a vector. You're screwing it up. You're giving it nonsense input. So those little things which you just miss. But once you sort those things out, some of them worked fine. Like it was all, shall we say, extraneous things. The actual accuracy of the thing, once you get it working fine, it actually produces very similar results. And it was, yeah. So there wasn't really correlation. And again, I didn't properly measure it in any way, but my anecdotal experience and my personal sort of experience of doing it was there wasn't a clear relationship between difficulty of getting the code to run and the actual accuracy of the final results.
Super interesting. Well, I gotta go to another meeting, Steve. Great job, and thanks.
Thank you so much, Alfredo.
Ciao,
Thank
ciao.
you. Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, and congratulations for this excellent and massive work. My question is I think it's relatively simple and straightforward, so I hope it doesn't take too much time. It's that after completing this whole amount of work, do you feel there's a need to distinguish between papers that you cannot successfully run, like they don't run without error, so you don't get to any results at all, and papers where you can run completely, but you get to different results?
No, that's a really good question, and you're right. I didn't. There is a clear distinction between those two, which is and there were relatively few. I think they ended up. I should have it on the top of my head, but there are 2 or 3 cases where I legitimately came up against an error, like basically an irresolvable error, as in the code just doesn't work as said. And so and those were the ones I called like those were failures. But you're right. There is a difference between an out and out failure and running the code and it's merely orders of magnitude off, or ridiculously, it's clearly not was the intended result, sort of thing. Now, no, you're right. I didn't make a clear distinction between those two, partly because I think I was lucky in the sense of I didn't have any cases of, wildly, like successfully run, but wildly off cases. They were all relatively, close to the original results. But you're right. That actually is a missing spot here between failure to run for whatever reason and technically running but still just wildly wrong, or wildly inconsistent. Yes, no, that's actually a really useful thing which actually should be part of a broader a broader appreciation of this whole idea. Yes.
Okay, thanks for your. I don't think it's your blind spot of yours. I think it's like not on the table this discussion, and it's something I've thought about it, yeah. Well, I'll get back to you with this, so you can.
No, that'd be great.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that'd be fantastic. I will. Thomas. Sorry, I just saw your you're on mute, Thomas. There we go.
Yeah, thank you very much. But maybe you want to reply more to the previous question. I don't know. So yeah, I have a question about the fact that. So thank you very much for the talk. It was great. It was a super interesting talk. I was wondering whether the fact that you selected meta-analysis as an object of study is maybe something very peculiar because for a meta-analysis to be possible, to be run, for instance, the data has to be shared in the first place. And probably the fact that 75% of the data of the studies share data maybe is a consequence of the fact that there was this meta-analysis. And the second point is that maybe the authors of meta-analysis are more interested by meta-science. They are more interested by reproducibility issues. So maybe there is a tendency for these authors of meta-analysis to share their code, to share the data, to make their work reproducible. What do you think about all this?
No, that is a really a very good point. It is the case that this is a like there's no way around it. This is a biased sample because we are looking at a particular type of analysis. And you're right, the very nature of meta-analysis is that it by its nature it is more likely to be an open set of data because we are talking about results from previously published studies. So by nature sort of available to all. And so it becomes sort of, shall we say, you're right, it could be more natural or more inclined to be shared, especially this period we're talking 2015 to 2017, where there's definitely awareness of the importance of data sharing amongst the eco-evo community. That's very clear from the literature and what's being written about it. But it might be being taken on at different rates of adoption by different parts of the research community. And so yes, that is a limitation. It's a limitation I should have mentioned at the end there. It is a limitation of this. I think you're right that it's biased, and I think you're right that it actually would tend to be on the side of overstating the overall rate of data sharing in the literature. However, one could say, however, for the particular analysis, for the particular example of meta-analysis, which is a relatively sizable sort of endeavor, within ecology, as well as in other domains as well. It stands on itself for the particular case of meta-analysis. Whether it stands as a wider thing is something that needs to be treated with more caution. So I'm basically agreeing with you in saying, yes, I think there's a biased sample. I'm not so sure about how much further we can generalize from this particular thing, but also we have to do that anyway because this is a snapshot in time. Things are, and also we do know that this is taking place in a period where there is great change going on. So the period, 2018 to 2020 is going to look very different from 2015 to 17. And again, it was going to be very different from the 3 years before that. Yeah. Thank you for the question. That's a really good one. Luciano?
Hello. Thank you, Steve. Is my audio decent, I hope?
Yes, I can hear you.
That was incredible work. Before me, I think there is a question from the chat from a person.
Oh, yes, Barbara.
If you want.
Absolutely. Let me hold on. Let me just find that.
I can read it.
I'll just read that. I'm just going to read that out.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
Sushant.
So Barbara's question was, do you think that the computational reproducibility checks carried out by journals would solve most of these issues?
Oh, that's great. Partly, but not all. So first of all, this has been various journals have been doing computational reproducibility checks for years. In some cases, particularly in political science and economics. This has been a standard thing since 2016 or so in some cases. Also, prominently, psychological science in psychology has also started a policy in the last couple of years with the new editor, Samin Bazir. They've started a policy of computationally reproducing the results of published papers there. Now, on the one hand, also, and now we're talking about a context where time and stuff really does matter. You can't just take ages with it. You can't do it, leisurely at a leisurely pace like I did. There's when we're talking about part of peer review and getting things published, there's a time imperative in getting it done. So, from what I understand, when the journal does do it and it's part of the peer review process, it does solve a lot of the problems. The very straightforward problems, like you uploaded the wrong data set, or the version of the code was missing a particular thing, or there's a typo or something like that. Those things get ironed out relatively effectively by this. But when we come to, and then we get into this thing of, at the time that it was checked by the journal was satisfied that the results checked out. They did the checks, it was all good. And so you have this stamp of approval that, in 2019, in 2022, in March of 2025, whenever it was, a check was made, and that check was sort of certified to be good by the journal. So it solves the question there. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem of, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, when someone comes along and attempts to do it again, that they're necessarily going to be able to get that same result, given the march of time and versions changing, or whatever. So that there's two problems there. There's in the moment reproducibility, which I understand is relatively good, and versus the, shall we say, the enduring possibility of reproducibility over the longer term. That's the first thing. The other thing is, it is time consuming and expensive. We're getting into a situation here, and let's not go into the ins and outs of it, but even though it is, a very interesting academic debate to have about whether we should be, paying the time of, ECRs or PhD students to reproduce other people's, results as part of, a peer review process. And because it is time consuming, and there are going to be examples of some analyses which are going to take hours to sort out, especially when you consider back and forth with the authors to say, I couldn't reproduce table 1, I don't understand what's going on here, can you take me through it, etc. All of that takes time, and all of that takes some amount of money. So there's a economic question about whether this is going to be a viable option for all journals in all cases, and that's before we get into things like sort of heavily computational projects which require cluster computing or substantial computational resources, which the journal just might not have the capacity to rerun themselves. What do we do in those sorts of cases as well? So there are lots of so in general, even though I think it is an effect when it works, and in sort of on the scale of the types of problems which you can deal with, it actually works very well. The problems start when we talk about whether advancing in time, as also just the intensity of the resources needed to do the check. So that's how I've come around to it. I know it's sort of a cop-out answer because it's yes and no, but that's sort of how I see the landscape of that. But I'd be interested to see. I'm hopeful that it might become a little bit more common, at least in some situations or some things. It might not be done for literally every paper. Maybe there's going to be a model of, you do it a random sample, or if there's a particular reason to want to do that for some reason, maybe that's the way it becomes sustainable. Oh, sorry, Luciana, do you have you had a question as well?
Yeah, I have. That were my thoughts as well, anyway, on this matter. Yeah, I have a small observation and then a small question.
Please.
I left a link to a recent work which was also the one who made me know SORTEE, and I saw some other people here who were involved.
Yes. So I'm just looking at it now. Yes.
Yeah, This was on BS journals, and I just wanted to let you know that in more recent times, data is very well shared, but code is still a challenge, and there's much to do.
It's fantastic. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. This is wonderful. This is great. This is exactly the kind of update yes, needed. Yes, that's fantastic.
Yeah, there are many more papers and people involved, but not the reproducibility was not assessed as in depth as it did. And then my small question is that you talked a bit about the struggle we face when trying to reproduce, but never mind the specific versions of the packages. Did you have any trouble figuring out which packages did you need to reproduce the results?
Yeah, it turned and this is and I want to I'll start by with the caveat that we're talking about it was a small sample that I was working with. Ultimately, we're only talking 26 things. That wasn't that much of an issue because in all the cases I looked at, I just had by good fortune or whatever, everyone actually did a good job of actually recording the packages, like with a library statement or something in the at the top of the R script as to what packages they used. So in that particular sense, I never got into the situation of going, they're calling this function. I've got no idea where that function comes from because it's not a base R function or anything like that. I got lucky, I think, in the sense that when people shared their code, they did go to the effort of putting in the library functions and so forth. Also on that, I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but it's part of the the supplementary material for this paper. I went through and I looked at how often each paper, let's put aside the code for the moment, but just in the actual papers themselves, how often did the authors within the paper refer to the R packages that they used, and even provide a reference to those. And a surprising amount of them do that. They say, we used R, 3.4 or 3.3 or whatever, and then also say, and we used the metaphor package, or the MC GL MM package, or so forth. And so it's interesting that even though they didn't share their code, there was an awareness that authors should be talking about what computational tools and packages they used. And so in theory, you could reconstruct packages to use and so forth from what the authors reported themselves. If you had the code which didn't have a very well documented all of that sort of thing, you might still be able to do it with a bit of careful reading and detective work to go, okay, they mentioned this, that's what that function must be, so forth, even though they weirdly didn't put the library statement or whatever.
Yes, thank you, because that's every library is not always what happens. I try to do my best against these cases. And
no, it's easy to do, especially especially when you're in the habit of you know what I mean. You might not depending on precisely how you're working. Like I was working in a very deliberate thing where I was very clearly calling all of the packages as part of installation each time, so I was always very conscious of it. But in general, it's easy to just forget those things, especially when it's part of your your standard working environment and stuff, and you forget to just mention it. How are we doing for time, Sorsha? Because I'm aware thank you, Luciana.
I think I was just gonna probably call it there, but thank everyone for, again, the engaging questions. That was really interesting conversation, and glad that we were able to.
Thank you all so much. I don't think there are any other. I just wanted to double check. There's no other questions in the chat or anything like that. It doesn't look like it, but
no, I don't think it's not him. Well, thank you again, Steve. That was fantastic. Enormous body of work and great to see. And yeah. Thank you again, everyone, for attending.
Thank you very much.
Keep an eye out for next workshop and webinar announcement coming soon. Thanks.
Thank you.